Mr. David Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Before I attempt to pick up on the Shadow Chancellor's final views on where we're going rather than where we are, I'd just like to draw the House's attention to a wider issue, which I think actually goes to a really quite important set of facts that the Honourable Member for Dundee was talking about in terms of Scotland's export arrangements. When economic historians look back in 100 years' time on this time, I suspect they'll view Brexit as small by comparison with what's happened to the entire global trade in the world. The last third of the century, we have seen a huge transformation of the wealth of the world off the back of free trade. About a quarter of the world's population, well over 1 billion, have been raised out of absolute poverty, $2 a day or thereabouts, by free trade. It's been a magnificent story over, as I say, about a third of a century. In that time, this has impacted us too. We have gone from, 20 years ago, 60% of our trade being with the European Union, 40% of the rest of the world, to nearly the other way around. In a couple of years, it will be the other way around. 60% with the rest of the world, 40% with the European Union. And I am loath to quote forecasts, given the bad name they're being given at the moment, but projection, not forecast, is that will continue. And to pick up on the Honourable Member for Dundee's point, to take the top three markets for British goods or UK goods in the rest of the world versus Europe, the top European ones are Germany, France and Holland, but Netherlands for us, they are dwarfed by our sales to America, China and Australia, our top three rest of the world ones. And I take the point that the Honourable Gentleman made, that we have to look very carefully, as we did when I was in government, at the regional balance of some of these exports, but the aggregate picture is very clear. Our trading future is actually more in the rest of the world than it is in Europe. And this has huge implications, massively underestimated by Treasury forecasts and Bank of England forecasts, over and over again, huge implications for the need to keep our freedom to continue, or to do trade deals to maximise our ability to exploit that. Now, I'm not going to spend very long on the actual proposal that the government's put in front of us, because it seems to me very clear that it's not going to survive the end of this debate. But just very quickly, the Attorney General's advice tells us about this, that the backstop would endure indefinitely and it would tie us to the customs union with no escape. That has massive implications, what I just said. The deal would still leave us, whatever the Chancellor says, still leave us subject to the rule of the European Court of Justice, albeit by a rather backdoor and concealed route. It would see Northern Ireland carved out of the United Kingdom, tied to the European Union single market and customs union. And it gives away £39 billion in exchange for the vaguest of political promises on a future deal. And because of all that, and because we'll be locked in at the discretion of the European Union, it puts us in a formidably bad negotiating position for the future. And that's really the most serious, in my view, other than the constitutional issues. It's the most serious practical aspect of what's proposed. So I do not believe it will survive, which means that the Shadow Chancellor's question of what are the future options is actually the central question of the debate, as it turns out.
Well,
now,
would you give way just on that?
I'll give way first there, and then I'll come back to you.
I'm grateful to the former Secretary of State for giving way. Now, I hear his reluctance to believe in forecasts, but he hasn't always been reluctant to forecast. In fact, on the 25th of May 2016, a month before the referendum, he said, "The first calling point of the UK's negotiator immediately after Brexit will not be Brussels, it will be Berlin to strike a deal." Now, if my memory serves me right, he became that UK's negotiator immediately after Brexit. Can you tell us how the striking of the deal in Berlin went? And when do we see the deal that he struck in Berlin? Is that what he's got in his hand just now, or has he lost it?
I also said you have to read more than one line of the speech, and maybe his iPad's too small to carry more than one sentence. But what I also said is the critical part of this negotiation will not be the first 2 years; it will be the last 3 months. The last 3 months, when that exactly will be true, when France and Germany will determine the outcome. So if he wants to quote me again, let him get it right next time. I'll give way to my answer.
Well, I'm grateful. Just one small point, really. He's focused on the backstop on the Northern Irish border. And he's quoted the Attorney-General as saying that we could potentially be in that indefinitely. But surely the if is if we decide to go into the backstop in the first place, because the other option is to extend the transition. Does he not agree?
That's what's laid out in the proposal. But that transition will then come to an end. And at the end of that, we still have to make a decision on where we're going, backstop or no. So I'm afraid we're always and the point about it is, it's at the behest of the European Union. It's not at our behest. And I have nothing against the European Union, but they are the negotiating partner who will make an advantage out of delaying it. I give way to my friend.
I thank my right honourable friend for giving way. And just really to reiterate that point, if you, on a plain reading of Article 3 of the protocol, it's quite clear that it is not necessarily a right for us to have that extended transition. We can only ask for it, and that is a different thing.
Yes, it's also true, but the general point is that the overall timetable is not in our control. It's in the other side's control. And as we have seen throughout this entire negotiation, the moment we gave away sequencing at the beginning, it gave an advantage to the other side. And my honourable friend, the ex-Minister of State's nodding, he remembers it. So let us, but the point I want to make today is there are basically three, if you forgive me not for the moment, a little later, there are essentially three emblematic conclusions to this. One is World Trade Organization, which we've talked about already, which I doubt will be a deliberate one, but it's a possible one. One is Norway, which a number of my colleagues on this side of the House and on the other side of the House have suggested might be the best outcome. And one is the Canada plus option. Now, there are compromises between them, there are mixtures of them, but those three essentially capture the possible outcomes. Now, let me start with the one where I pretty much disagree with everybody who's spoken so far, and this is the issue of the World Trade Organization deal, the so-called no deal, which actually, what the Chancellor called it a strict no deal, because he knows full well all the preparations have gone in government to create a basic no deal or basic outcome, a basic negotiated outcome. There is a whole stratum, the whole spectrum of possible types of no deal, some of them dealing with the issues that my honourable friend sitting in front of me raised before, aviation, data, and so on, all of which, if this deal goes down, as I think it will in a few days, if this deal goes down, there will be a scramble in London and Brussels to start putting those one-on-one unilateral negotiations together. So there's a range of those possibilities. I'll give way. Actually, if you'll forgive me, the honourable lady here first. Yeah.
I'm grateful to the right honourable gentleman for giving way. I'm slightly puzzled as to why he is so critical of the backstop arrangements, given that he himself signed off the original draft in December last year.
She clearly hasn't read my resignation letter, in which I made clear what I'd said to the Prime Minister about that backstop arrangement. Thank you.
I could just go on the point of aviation and WTO, which was also mentioned by the member for Mid-Worcester in a previous intervention. It is the case that actually the EU itself is looking for a deal on aviation, as we would be. So actually there is no difference. The EU still doesn't have a deal on aviation.
Yes, and hardly surprising, since we have the biggest aviation hub in Europe and one of the biggest in the world in this country. But I've never, yes, all right, I'll give way once, one more.
Mr. Speaker, I thank you for giving way. Just on the backstop, as the Honourable Gentleman is referring to it, it was said earlier on that all the regions in the United Kingdom would be supportive of this. The MPs, the Unionist MPs, the DUP MPs in this House are not supporting the withdrawal agreement. And does he recognise, as I suspect that he does, that Unionist opinion feel alienated by the proposals that are put forward, which will weaken our position within the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, because the EU will have a final say on what happens in relation to the single market and the customs union over Northern Ireland?
And indeed, to reinforce the point I made to the Honourable Lady earlier, I did tell the Prime Minister that last December, as everybody now knows. Now, I don't take a utopian or a dystopian view of this World Trade Organization option. There are colleagues on this side of the House who think it will actually be, in the long run, be the best because it's the freest in terms of the outcomes. And there are those who fear it as a complete disaster. And I think it's neither. It's absolutely neither. There's been enormous amounts of black propaganda about this proposal, about World Trade Organization outcome. We heard a month or two ago that the supplies of insulin would dry up. No, they won't. We talked to the pharmaceutical companies, we talked to the NHS, did their checks, they won't dry up. No drugs will dry up, full stop. We were told that planes would be grounded. The point my honourable friend just made. In January, if she'll forgive me in a moment, in January 2018, the European Commission briefing document was released showing that there will be EU-wide contingency measures ensuring no stoppage of aviation. No stoppage of aviation. And delays, well, before I get to delays at Calais, I'll give way to the honourable lady.
I'm very grateful. I would be very grateful if my right honourable friend for Halton, Price and Howden would look at the evidence that pharmaceutical companies have given to the Bayes Select Committee to outline the catastrophic results of a no-deal Brexit. Now, I recall my right honourable friend saying that we wouldn't be needing an implementation period because we would have had our deal by now. And I'm afraid it's not as easy and it's not as simple as he appears to wish to outline.
Well, with
right honourable members to intervene, and that is in the nature and tradition of parliamentary debate in this place. However, I hope I can be forgiven for making the point that if people intervene and don't subsequently get called to speak, they won't complain. Brackets, what are those pigs I see flying in front of my very eyes? Mr David Davis.
What a pity, Mr Speaker. I enjoy the interventions, as you well know. Let me say the honourable lady's misquoting me from somewhere, because it was me that actually negotiated the implementation period element of this, and for that reason, precisely because it's not without hiccups, it's not without issues. There will be practical issues in the first year of a World Trade Organisation outcome, but that does not overwhelm the big advantages, the massive advantages of having the freedom to negotiate our trade deals in the future. I'll just finish very quickly on delays at Calais. Will he forgive me? I've just been almost given... No, I've always been given instructions. I'm afraid not on this occasion. Delays at Calais. The first thing to say about delays at Calais is the French do not intend it. I know in our chauvinist way we expect the French to misbehave. That is not their intention. They've said in terms, the prefect of the Calais region, the representative of Calais, the head of the French customs have all said they're going to do everything in their power, range from lower inspection rates, light touch phytosanitary inspections and the rest, to make sure that the trade between Calais and Dover will work. And if there is a hiccup, and we've had them before with driver strikes and so on, we are able to divert 20 to 40% of the trade to other ports. So this is a good example of how there have been wild assertions that are simply not right. I'm very sorry that the Chancellor is not here, because frankly I wanted him to hear what I had to say about the projections that the Honourable Member for Dundee was talking about and relying on rather too much, I think. Because it isn't the Rees-Mogg Times or some other organisation on one side of the debate that actually criticised the Bank of England. It was a Nobel Prize winner, Paul Krugman, hardly a Brexiteer, who said that they castigated them, as did Andrew Sentence, an ex-member of the Monetary Policy Committee, again not a Brexiteer. They were simply disgraceful pieces, polemical projections. They were not forecasts in any way, and I think they will come to regret it if they haven't done already. So that's the sort of practical element. The other issue to bear in mind, and this matters because WTO is a walkaway. That's the problem. It's a walkaway. It's an outcome that you don't want, but it's what you've got to have there in order to have a proper negotiation. And it's a hard fact we have to face. It's a walkaway. We all think that we're going to suffer most from a WTO outcome. This is simply not the case. There is an asymmetric arrangement here. We have a floating power. In fact, I'm quoting the German chief economist of Deutsche Bank here. We have a floating pound. That's what protected us so far in the last 2 years, the movement of the pound. And it will protect us again. We have unilateral capability which nobody else in Europe will have. Nobody else in Europe will have the ability to change our taxes and our regulations to make sure that we get the FDI that the Honourable Gentleman was talking about. And finally, of course, we have the upside of the other free trade agreements. And that's why another reason I'm sorry that the Chancellor's here. Because one of the big differences between him and me is he does not believe free trade agreements deliver a large economic bang for their buck. Well, I have to say, if you look at the last 30 years of world history, there are billions of people in the world who might just take a different view on that. Now, the second thing, the second option that I would like to talk to briefly was the Norway option. Now, the Norway option I looked at very carefully. Indeed, I got castigated by my own side for paying too much attention to the Norway option. But I thought it's very, very important that we ensure that every single possible option is explored well. And I was approached and talked at great length by my honourable friend, the member for Grantham and Stamford. And Norway Norway Plus appeared to have three actual virtues to it, as their protagonists say. First was it's the easiest negotiation, they thought, the simplest. It's the smallest movement and therefore the simplest negotiation. Secondly, it meets the conditions of the referendum, they say. And thirdly, it's the softest of soft Brexits. All possibly good arguments, except they're not true. The negotiation, it's not simple. We can't simply just stay in the EEA. That doesn't work. Jean-Claude Pires, the ex-head of the EU Legal Service, said in terms we'll have to renegotiate every single clause of EEA arrangement. It will require unanimity from 30 different members, and they are going to exact a price. Now, one of the advantages of Norway, you would think, is we control our own fisheries policy. But are we going to get that with a vote from Denmark, and a vote from France, and a vote from Spain? No, we're not. That's one of the problems in this. The negotiation hurdles are very big. It's cited that Michel Barnier said this was a possible outcome, only in conjunction with customs union membership. The two together, we are locked. We are basically in a worse position than the government's proposal. We're basically locked into the single market, no say, no control, but in every other respect, including free movement of peoples and paying money, we will be locked there. Norway does not find it satisfactory. Politically, frankly, a country like ours certainly should not. So that doesn't work. Finally, it delivers on the result of the referendum. No, it doesn't. Free movement, money, independent trade policy, jurisdiction of supranational courts, rule taker, on all of those we fail under Norway. So what's left? The last thing that's left is the free trade agreement. Now, I have long thought this was the best option. This is the one that's been called Canada Plus Plus Plus. It's been called Super Canada and a variety of other names. And somewhere buried in the middle of Dexu, in the middle of my old department, there is a piece of paper, well, actually, watch that thick, laying out how this can be done in detail, including some legal text. The concept is simple, and that's important in this context, because we're going to have a very limited time in the last few months to negotiate this. And this is the point I made when, a couple of years ago when I was making this argument. This is the 3 months that matter. The European Union always takes the negotiation down to the wire. Always. The last hour, the last day, the last hour, the last minute, the last second. Sometimes it stops the clock to allow the negotiations to conclude. And that's what's going to happen here, I suspect. I suspect we're going to go deep into time on this. So why was this attractive? It was attractive because we could build it from precedents. Canada is an EU-negotiated precedent. And you could add to it, the plus, plus, plus means all the bits that are not good about Canada. There's no decent mutual recognition agreement. You can lift that out of South Korea or the Australian deal. There's no decent phytosanitary arrangements. You can lift that out of New Zealand. So you go back to them and you say, here we have a proposal constructed entirely of your own precedents. It can't undermine the single market because you negotiated it. It can't undermine the four principles because you negotiated it. So that's the attraction of the Canada Plus Plus Plus. That's why it's based on that template. All based on precedents previously negotiated by the Commission. So it is perfectly possible for us to create a draft legal text on the basis of where we are now and put that back to the Union and say the 39 billion rides on this. You have to agree the substantive elements before we sign off, and then you have to agree the detail elements by the end of 2019. Plenty of time to do that on the basis of an existing boilerplate text. That's what we should be doing. We should stop grovelling to Europe and start grasping our future. Yeah.